The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of my small cottage, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. I stood by the window, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me, but despite the gentle light, an unfamiliar chill settled in my bones. The village of Bellspring was waking up, the faint sounds of activity drifting through the air, the clatter of pots from nearby kitchens, the distant bark of a dog, and the low murmur of voices as neighbors greeted each other on the way to their morning chores. Bellspring had always been my home, a place of comfort and familiarity. My mother had raised me in this very cottage, teaching me the values of kindness, honesty, and hard work. She had passed away 2 years ago, leaving me with a small but well-tended garden, a few chickens, and the memory of her gentle smile to guide me. Life had been simple, but it was enough. Or at least it had been until recently. Lately, something had shifted in the village. It was subtle at first, averted eyes, hurried steps when I passed by. But as time went on, the signs became impossible to ignore. Conversations would halt abruptly as I approached, and people who had once greeted me with warmth now seemed to barely tolerate my presence. I couldn't understand what had changed. Had I done something to offend them? I searched my memory, but nothing stood out. I was shaken from my thoughts by a knock on the door. Wiping my hands on my apron, I opened it to find Mary standing on my doorstep. She was a stout woman with kind eyes, and we had grown up together, playing in the meadows and chasing each other through the woods. But today, she seemed different, tense, almost nervous. "Mary, what brings you here so early?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Mary shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting the hem of her shawl. "Caroline, I wanted to talk to you," she began, her voice unusually hesitant. I stepped aside to let her in, concern growing in the pit of my stomach. "Of course. Come in, would you like some tea?" She nodded, and I busied myself with the teapot, giving her time to gather her thoughts. When I handed her a steaming cup, she took it with both hands, but didn't immediately drink. Instead, she stared into the amber liquid as if it held the answers to some unspoken question. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression troubled. "Caroline, have you noticed that people have been acting strange around you?" Her words confirmed my worst fears, but I'd forced myself to stay calm. "I've noticed," I admitted quietly, sitting down across from her. "But I don't understand why. Have I done something wrong, Mary?" She shook her head quickly, her brows furrowing. "No, it's not like that. It's the rumors, Caroline." "Rumors?" My heart skipped a beat. What kind of rumors? Mary hesitated again, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She didn't want to hurt me, but she knew she had to tell me the truth. "People have been saying strange things about you. They think you're different. They say you've been acting odd, talking to yourself, wandering the woods at night." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "That's not true," I protested, my voice rising in desperation. "I've never done anything like that. Why would they say such things?" "I don't know," Mary replied, her voice soft with sympathy. "People can be cruel when they don't understand something. They see things that aren't there, make up stories to fill in the gaps." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "But Mary, you know me. You know I would never." "I do know you, Caroline," she interrupted, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I know you're a good person. But sometimes that's not enough to stop people from talking." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, determined not to cry. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered, feeling more lost than I ever had in my life. Mary squeezed my hand gently. "I wish I had an answer for you, but I think you just have to keep being yourself. The people who truly know you will see the truth eventually, and those who don't, well, they're not worth your worry." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only made me feel more isolated. How could I go on living in this village, surrounded by people who thought such terrible things about me? The thought of leaving Bellspring crossed my mind, but where would I go? This was my home, the only place I had ever known. Mary stayed for a while longer, talking about trivial things to lighten the mood, but I could tell she was still uneasy. When she finally left, I watched her walk down the path, her steps quick and her head down, as if she couldn't wait to be away from my cottage. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. The air inside the cottage was stifling, so I stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The garden was quiet, the flowers nodding gently in the breeze, but even here, I couldn't escape the sense of being watched. I glanced toward the village and saw Mrs. Haggerty standing by her gate, her eyes fixed on me. When she saw me looking, she quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with a basket of laundry. A wave of anger surged through me. I wasn't a stranger to hard work. I had spent years tending to my mother during her illness, and I had always helped my neighbors whenever they needed it. I had done nothing to deserve this treatment, and yet here I was being treated like an outcast. I walked to the edge of the garden, where the forest began, and stared into the shadowy depths of the trees. The villagers spoke of the woods as a place of mystery, where strange things happened, but to me, it had always been a place of solace. I had often wandered there as a child, losing myself in the rustling of leaves and the songs of birds. It was a place where I could be alone with my thoughts, away from the prying eyes of others. But now, even the woods seemed to hold a threat, a reminder of the rumors that had poisoned the minds of my neighbors. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, judged for something I didn't understand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I couldn't let this break me. I had to stay strong, to hold on to the person I knew myself to be. My mother had taught me to be kind, to be patient, and to always believe in the goodness of others. But right now, that goodness seemed far out of reach. As I turned to go back inside, I caught sight of a figure approaching from the village. It was Peter, the young blacksmith's apprentice. He was a quiet boy, always polite, and I had often bought nails and other tools from him at the market. He was carrying a bundle of firewood, and when he saw me, he hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "Good morning, Peter," I called out, trying to sound cheerful. He stopped a few feet away, shifting the bundle in his arms. "Morning, Miss Caroline," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Are you bringing that firewood to someone?" I asked, hoping to draw him into conversation. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, glancing around nervously. "My mother asked me to take it to Mrs. Wilkes." I nodded, feeling the awkwardness between us like a physical barrier. "That's kind of you." Peter looked down at his feet, then back up at me, his expression troubled. "Miss Caroline, is it true what they're saying? About you being different?" His question caught me off guard, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "What do you mean, Peter?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated, then blurted out, "They're saying you talk to spirits, that you've got strange powers. My mother said I shouldn't talk to you, but I don't believe it. Do you?" His words hung in the air between us, and I felt a surge of sadness and frustration. How could such lies have taken root so quickly? I wanted to tell him the truth, to make him understand that I was just an ordinary person, but I could see the fear in his eyes, the doubt that had already begun to grow. "Peter," I said softly, "I'm just Caroline, the same person I've always been. I don't have any strange powers, and I certainly don't talk to spirits. People are just afraid of what they don't understand." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said quietly. "But it's hard, you know. Everyone's saying things, and it's hard not to listen." I reached out and touched his arm gently. "Thank you for listening to me, Peter. That means more than you know." He gave me a small, uncertain smile, then turned and hurried away, the bundle of firewood clutched tightly in his arms. As I watched him go, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. How many more times would I have to defend myself against these baseless rumors? How long would it take for people to see the truth? The thought of facing another day in this village, surrounded by suspicion and fear, was almost too much to bear. But I knew I couldn't give up. I had to keep going, to find a way to prove that I was still the same Caroline they had always known. Even if it meant standing alone, I would fight to reclaim my place in this village, to show them that the whispers in the wind were nothing but lies. The days after my conversation with Mary were difficult. I avoided the village as much as possible, choosing instead to stay close to home, tending to my garden and caring for the chickens. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the sense of isolation grew stronger with each passing day. The cottage, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The whispers and rumors seemed to seep through the very walls, and I longed for some escape, some respite from the relentless judgment of the villagers. It was on one of these days, as I was mending the fence in the garden, that I first saw him. He was walking down the road that led into the village, a tall figure with broad shoulders, carrying a small pack slung over one shoulder. His hair was a rich chestnut brown, and even from a distance, I could see the easy confidence in his stride. He was a stranger, something rare in Bellspring, where everyone knew everyone else's business. I straightened up, wiping the sweat from my brow with the back of my hand, and watched as he approached. As he drew nearer, I saw that he was younger than I had first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jawline and eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. There was a warmth in his gaze, a friendliness that put me at ease despite my usual wariness of outsiders. He paused as he reached the gate, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and then he smiled, a smile that was both genuine and kind. "Good day," he greeted, his voice smooth and pleasant. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." I shook my head, trying to find my voice. "Not at all." "Are you looking for something, or someone?" He nodded, glancing back at the road he had traveled. "I'm new to the village and looking for work. I heard there's a carpenter's shop here, and I'm hoping they could use an extra pair of hands." His explanation made sense, though I couldn't help but be curious about what had brought him to our small, isolated village. It wasn't the kind of place that drew outsiders, but I didn't want to pry, so I simply nodded. "The carpenter's shop is just down the road, near the center of the village," I told him, pointing in the direction he should go. "Thank you, miss," he replied, and then hesitated, as if considering whether to say more. Finally, he extended his hand toward me. "My name's Rowan, by the way, Rowan Carter." I hesitated for a brief moment, unsure of whether it was wise to introduce myself to a stranger, but something about him made me feel safe, as though I could trust him. I reached out and shook his hand, finding his grip firm but gentle. "Caroline," I said softly, "Caroline Avery." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Caroline," Rowan said, releasing my hand. His smile widened, and for a brief moment, the world seemed a little brighter. "Thank you for your help. I hope we'll see each other around." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. It had been so long since someone had looked at me without suspicion or fear, and his kindness was like a balm to my wounded soul. "Perhaps," I murmured, unsure of what else to say. Rowan gave me a final nod before turning and continuing down the road toward the village. I watched him go, a small part of me wishing I had asked him more, where he had come from, why he had chosen Bellspring. But I had been too shy, too guarded, and now he was gone, leaving me alone once more with my thoughts. Over the next few days, I couldn't help but think about Rowan. It was strange how one brief encounter could linger in the mind, but there was something about him that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was his easy smile, or the way he had looked at me with such warmth and sincerity. Or maybe it was simply that he had treated me like a person, rather than a source of rumors and suspicion. I found myself wondering if he had found work at the carpenter's shop, and whether he was settling into life in the village. I had no way of knowing, of course, since I still avoided the village as much as possible. But the thought of him brought a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone in the world was so quick to judge. A few days later, I was returning from the woods with a basket of fresh herbs when I heard footsteps behind me on the path. I turned, half expecting to see one of the villagers, but to my surprise, it was Rowan. He was carrying a bundle of freshly cut wood, his shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms. He smiled when he saw me, and my heart did a little flip at the sight. "Caroline, fancy meeting you out here," he said cheerfully, falling into step beside me. I smiled back, feeling a bit more at ease in his presence now. "I was just gathering some herbs. How are you finding Bellspring?" "It's quiet," Rowan replied with a chuckle. "But I like it. It's peaceful, and the people seem interesting." I couldn't help but laugh softly at his diplomatic choice of words. Interesting is one way to put it. Rowan glanced at me, his expression turning more serious. "I've noticed that you keep to yourself, though. Is everything all right?" His question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. But there was something in his tone, a genuine concern that made me want to open up, to share the burden that had been weighing on me for so long. I've had some difficulties with the villagers," I admitted quietly, my eyes fixed on the path ahead. "There are rumors, and well, people can be cruel when they're afraid of something they don't understand." Rowan's brow furrowed, and he slowed his pace slightly, as if trying to give me space to continue. Rumors? What kind of rumors? I hesitated, feeling a lump form in my throat. It was one thing to acknowledge the whispers to myself, but another to speak them aloud to someone else. But Rowan's presence, his kindness, made me feel safe enough to share my pain. They say that I'm different, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. That I talk to spirits, or that I have strange powers. None of it is true, of course, but people have started to avoid me. It's like I'm an outcast in my own home. Rowan was silent for a moment, and I wondered if I had said too much. But then he stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression filled with empathy. "That's not right, Caroline," he said softly, his voice full of conviction. "No one deserves to be treated like that. I don't believe in those rumors for a second. You're just, you. A good person." His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I had been holding on to so much pain, so much frustration, that hearing someone else say that I was good, that I didn't deserve this, was almost too much to bear. "Thank you, Rowan," I whispered, unable to keep the emotion out of my voice. "You have no idea how much that means to me." Rowan reached out and gently squeezed my shoulder, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to go through this alone, Caroline. If you ever need someone to talk to or just someone to listen, I'm here. I've been through my own share of tough times, and I know how important it is to have someone on your side." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. It had been so long since I had felt this kind of kindness, this sense of being seen and heard. Rowan's presence was like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness that had been threatening to consume me. We walked the rest of the way in companionable silence, the tension that had gripped me for so long slowly beginning to ease. When we reached the edge of the village, Rowan turned to me again, his expression serious. "I'll be working at the carpenter's shop most days," he said. "But if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to come by. And remember, Caroline, you're not alone." I smiled at him, feeling a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in months. "I'll remember, Rowan. Thank you." He gave me a final nod before turning and heading toward the carpenter's shop, his strong, steady presence leaving me with a sense of hope that I hadn't dared to feel in a long time. As I watched him go, I realized that for the first time in months, I didn't feel so alone. Rowan's kindness had sparked something within me, a determination to fight back against the whispers, to reclaim my place in the village, and to prove that I was more than the rumors that surrounded me. With a renewed sense of purpose, I turned toward my cottage, feeling a lightness in my step that had been absent for far too long. The road ahead would be difficult, I knew that. But with Rowan's support, I felt that perhaps, just perhaps, I could find my way through the darkness and back into the light. The days following my conversation with Rowan passed more quickly than I had anticipated. The warmth of summer had settled over Bellspring, bringing with it the hum of bees in the garden and the scent of blooming flowers. I found myself looking forward to each new day, knowing that at some point I would likely cross paths with Rowan. Our meetings had become a comforting routine, a few words exchanged over the garden fence, a shared smile as we passed on the village road, and occasionally longer conversations that left me feeling lighter, as though a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. Rowan had quickly become a familiar sight in the village. He took to his work at the carpenter's shop with ease, and it wasn't long before the villagers began to accept him as one of their own. I heard snippets of conversation in the marketplace, how he was a hard worker, always willing to lend a hand, and how his easygoing nature made him popular with the men at the tavern. But even as Rowan was welcomed into the fold, he never wavered in his kindness toward me. If anything, our bond only grew stronger. One warm afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch of my cottage, mending a tear in one of my dresses. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, and I was just finishing up my stitching when I heard the familiar sound of Rowan's footsteps on the path. "Good evening, Caroline," he called out as he approached, his voice carrying a note of cheerfulness that instantly lifted my spirits. "Good evening, Rowan," I replied, setting my sewing aside and standing to greet him. "You're finishing up late today." He nodded, wiping a bit of sawdust from his brow. "We had a big order come in, tables and chairs for the new inn over in Millbrook. But I didn't want to miss the chance to say hello before the day was done." His words brought a smile to my face, and I gestured toward the bench on the porch. "Would you like to sit for a while? I have some lemonade if you'd like." That sounds perfect, Rowan replied, his eyes lighting up as he took a seat beside me. I poured him a glass of lemonade from the pitcher I had prepared earlier, and as he took a sip, he let out a satisfied sigh. You know, Caroline, you make the best lemonade I've ever had. I'm starting to think it might have some magic in it after all. I laughed at his playful comment, shaking my head. If only it were that simple. But I'm glad you enjoy it. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the peaceful sounds of the evening surrounding us, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant chirping of crickets, and the soft murmur of the nearby stream. I could feel the tension of the day melting away, replaced by a deep sense of contentment that I had rarely felt in recent months. After a while, Rowan set his glass down and turned to me, his expression more serious. Caroline, I've been meaning to ask you something. I looked at him curiously, sensing the weight behind his words. What is it, Rowan? He'd hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. I've been thinking about the future, about what I want to do, where I want to go, and I was wondering if you've thought about it too, about what you want for your future. His question caught me off guard, and I felt a rush of emotions I hadn't expected. The future had always been a vague, distant thing for me, something I had never given much thought to, especially not since the rumors had taken hold in the village. My life had been so focused on surviving day to day, on keeping my head down and avoiding the harsh judgment of others, that I had forgotten to dream, to hope for something better. But now, sitting here with Rowan, the idea of a future with him, suddenly seemed possible. I found myself imagining a life that was full of warmth and love, a life where I wasn't alone, where the whispers of the village didn't matter anymore. I haven't really thought about it, I admitted, my voice soft. I suppose I've been too afraid to dream of anything beyond the present, but maybe it's time to start thinking about it. Rowan's gaze was steady, and there was a softness in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. I think you should, Caroline. You deserve to be happy, to have a life that's full of love and joy. His words were like a balm to my soul, and I felt a warmth spreading through me that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to hope, to imagine what a future with Rowan might look like. What about you, Rowan? I asked, wanting to know more about his dreams. What do you want for your future? He smiled a little sheepishly, as if he hadn't expected the question to be turned back on him. I've thought about it a lot, actually. I've never had much, just a wandering life, moving from place to place, taking whatever work I could find. But now I want something more. I want to settle down, to build something lasting, maybe even start a family. The idea of Rowan wanting a family, of him wanting to build a life here in Bellspring, sent my heart racing. I could see it so clearly, a small house on the edge of the village, a garden filled with flowers, and the two of us working side by side, building a life together. It was a dream I had never dared to entertain, but now, with Rowan by my side, it didn't seem so impossible. That sounds wonderful, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think you would be very happy here. I think I would too, Rowan replied, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before he looked away, as if gathering his courage. Caroline, there's something else I've been wanting to say. I held my breath, sensing that this was a turning point, a moment that could change everything. What is it, Rowan? He took a deep breath, then turned to face me fully, his eyes filled with sincerity. I care about you, Caroline, more than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And I think I could be happy here with you, if you'll have me. His words hung in the air between us, and I felt a rush of emotions, happiness, fear, hope, all tangled together in a way that left me breathless. I had never expected to hear such words, to have someone like Rowan care for me in this way. It felt like a dream, too good to be true, and yet here he was, offering me the very thing I had longed for without even realizing it. I care about you too, Rowan, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. But are you sure? I mean, with everything that's happened, the rumors, I don't want you to be dragged into all of that. Rowan reached out and took my hand, his touch gentle but firm. I don't care about the rumors, Caroline. I know who you are, who you really are. And that's all that matters to me. We can face whatever comes together. Tears filled my eyes, and I squeezed his hand, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and love that I had never known before. "Thank you, Rowan. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm so glad you're here." He smiled, a warmth spreading across his features that made my heart swell with happiness. "You don't have to do anything to deserve love, Caroline. It's just something that happens, and I'm glad it happened to us." We sat there on the porch, hand in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. In that moment, the future didn't seem so frightening anymore. It felt like a promise, a beautiful dream that was within reach as long as we had each other. As the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Rowan leaned closer, his voice soft and full of emotion. "Caroline, would you ever consider building a life with me? Maybe one day we could have our own little home, just the two of us." I looked into his eyes, seeing the hope and sincerity there, and felt my heart swell with love. "Yes, Rowan," I whispered, my voice filled with the certainty I had been searching for. "I would love that more than anything." And in that moment, as we sat together on the porch of my little cottage, I knew that my dreams of a future were no longer just dreams. They were a possibility, one that I was ready to embrace, with Rowan by my side. The following weeks were filled with a kind of happiness I had almost forgotten was possible. Rowan and I spent more and more time together, our connection deepening with each passing day. The villagers who once avoided me seemed to soften in Rowan's presence. Some even began to offer small smiles or greetings when we passed by, as if his acceptance of me made them reconsider their own judgments. For the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to reclaim my place in the village. With Rowan by my side, the whispers that once haunted me faded into the background, replaced by dreams of a future that now felt within reach. We spoke often of the life we wanted to build together, a small home on the edge of the village, a garden bursting with flowers, and perhaps even children one day. It was a dream I clung to with all my heart, grateful for the light Rowan had brought into my life. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the fields, Rowan and I walked together down the dirt path leading away from the village. We often took these evening strolls, enjoying the peace and solitude away from prying eyes. Tonight, however, Rowan seemed distracted, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a quiet tension that I couldn't quite place. "Is everything all right, Rowan?" I asked, glancing up at him with concern. He hesitated, then nodded, though I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Just tired, I suppose. The work at the carpenter's shop has been demanding lately." I knew there was more to it than that, but I didn't press him. Instead, I slipped my hand into his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You work so hard. I wish there was something I could do to help." He smiled down at me, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You already do more than you know, Caroline. Just being with you makes everything easier." His words warmed my heart, but the unease in his tone lingered, casting a shadow over our walk. As we approached the edge of the woods, Rowan suddenly stopped, his expression troubled. "Caroline, there's something I need to take care of tonight," he said, his voice serious. "I won't be able to walk you home, but I'll come by tomorrow, I promise." I frowned, taken aback by the abrupt change in his demeanor. "Is everything okay? You seem worried." He shook his head quickly, forcing a smile that I could tell was strained. "It's nothing to worry about, just some business I need to handle." His vague response did little to ease my concerns, but I knew better than to push him when he wasn't ready to talk. "All right," I said softly, trying to hide my disappointment. "I'll see you tomorrow then." Rowan leaned down and kissed my forehead, his touch lingering for a moment longer than usual. "Good night, Caroline. Take care." I watched him disappear into the woods, a sense of unease settling over me like a heavy blanket. There was something he wasn't telling me, something that was clearly weighing on him, and the thought of it gnawed at my insides. I trusted Rowan, but the secrecy, the distance he had put between us tonight, left me with an unsettling feeling that I couldn't shake. The next morning, I woke early, unable to rid myself of the anxiety that had taken root in my chest. I busied myself with chores around the cottage, hoping to distract myself from the growing worry in my mind. But as the hours passed, and Rowan didn't come by as he had promised, my concern deepened. By midday, I couldn't take it any longer. I decided to go into the village to see if I could find him, hoping that perhaps he had simply been delayed at the carpenter's shop. As I made my way down the familiar path, my heart pounded in my chest, a sense of dread building with each step. When I reached the village square, I saw a small group of people gathered near the tavern, their voices carrying a mix of laughter and excitement. At the center of the group was Rowan, but what I saw made my blood run cold. He was leaning heavily against a woman I didn't recognize, a tall, raven-haired beauty with a mischievous smile. And they were surrounded by a few other men, including one I recognized as Thiago, a notorious troublemaker who was rumored to be Rowan's cousin. Rowan looked different. His usually composed and kind expression was replaced by a drunken grin, his eyes glazed over. The sight of him in such a state, with the woman draped over him, filled me with a mixture of shock, anger, and hurt. This was not the Rowan I knew, the man who had promised to build a life with me. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had been hiding a part of himself from me all along. Summoning all my courage, I approached the group, my voice trembling as I called out to him. "Rowan, what are you doing?" The laughter around us died down as the others turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. Rowan blinked, seeming to take a moment to register my presence. When he finally focused on me, his grin faltered, replaced by a look of guilt. "Caroline, I didn't expect to see you here," he slurred, struggling to stand up straight. The woman beside him chuckled, her eyes narrowing as she looked me over. "Oh, so this is the famous Caroline you've been talking about, Rowan? I must say, she's not quite what I expected." Thiago, who was leaning against the wall of the tavern, laughed loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. "Rowan's been keeping secrets, hasn't he? But don't worry, sweetheart, we won't bite much." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the reality of the situation hitting me like a punch to the gut. This was the company Rowan kept. These were the people he had chosen to spend his time with, rather than keeping his promises to me. "Rowan, I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you here with them?" He looked down, his expression one of shame. "Caroline, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to see this. I just needed to blow off some steam, that's all." "Blow off some steam?" I repeated, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You promised me, Rowan. You promised we would build a life together, that you were serious about our future. And now I find you here, like this." The woman beside him snorted, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, love. Men will be men. You didn't really think you could tame him, did you?" Thiago, emboldened by the woman's words, stepped forward, a lecherous grin spreading across his face. "Caroline, was it? Why don't you come join us? We're having a good time. No need to be such a spoilsport." Before I could react, he reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip rough and uninvited. Panic surged through me as I struggled to pull away, my heart racing with fear. "Let go of me," I cried, trying to twist out of his grasp. But Thiago only tightened his hold, pulling me closer with a sneer. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't make this difficult. We're just having a bit of fun." "Leave her alone, Thiago," Rowan snapped, finally finding his voice as he staggered toward us. I said let her go. But Thiago ignored him, his grip unrelenting. Desperation clawed at me as I tried to break free, my mind racing with fear. In that moment, I realized that the Rowan I had fallen in love with, the man I had dreamed of a future with, was no longer the person standing before me. This Rowan was lost to me, consumed by the darkness I had been blind to. Summoning all my strength, I wrenched my arm free from Thiago's grasp and stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at Rowan, the pain of betrayal cutting deep. "I thought I knew you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But I was wrong. You're not the man I thought you were." Rowan's face crumpled with regret, but the damage was done. I turned and fled from the scene, my heart shattering with every step. The dream I had clung to, the future I had dared to hope for, was gone, replaced by the bitter reality of shattered illusions. As I ran through the village, the whispers I had once feared seemed to echo in my ears, taunting me, reminding me of the truth I had refused to see. Rowan was not the man I had believed him to be. He was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had hidden his true self from me until it was too late. When I finally reached the safety of my cottage, I collapsed onto the porch, my tears flowing freely as the weight of everything crashed down on me. The hope, the dreams, the love I had felt, All of it had been an illusion, a fragile thing that had shattered at the first touch of reality. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, I was left alone with my pain and the harsh truth that the future I had dreamed of was no more. The days that followed were some of the darkest I had ever known. The dream I had cherished, the love I had believed in, lay in ruins. My heart ached with the pain of betrayal, and the loneliness I had fought so hard to overcome returned with a vengeance, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating shroud. The village's whispers, once faint and distant, now felt like knives slicing through my already wounded soul. I kept to myself, avoiding the village and its people as much as I could. My cottage, once a place of comfort and refuge, now felt like a prison, each corner a reminder of the future I had foolishly imagined with Rowan. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind busy, but the pain was relentless, gnawing at me no matter how hard I tried to push it away. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, there was a knock on my door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the thought of facing anyone from the village filled me with dread. But the knocking persisted, soft yet insistent, and I knew I couldn't avoid it. With a deep breath, I opened the door, and to my surprise, I found Mrs. Hargrove, the village midwife, standing on the threshold. Her kind eyes, usually so full of warmth, were clouded with concern as she looked at me. "Good evening, Caroline," she said gently, her voice laced with worry. "May I come in?" "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let her in, though I couldn't hide the surprise in my voice. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Hargrove walked into the small sitting room and took a seat at the table, her movements deliberate, as if she were trying to find the right words. I sat across from her, my heart racing as a sense of foreboding settled over me. "Caroline," she began, her tone serious, "I've come to talk to you about Rowan." At the mention of his name, my chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow. I had been trying so hard to forget, to move on, but it seemed that the past wasn't ready to let go of me just yet. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though it trembled despite my efforts. Mrs. Hargrove sighed, her hands folded on the table as she leaned forward slightly. "I know you've been hurt, my dear. I've seen the change in you since that night. And I don't blame you for wanting to distance yourself from him. But there are things you don't know, things that have been kept from you." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I could feel the weight of her gaze on me. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully, then finally spoke. "Rowan didn't come to this village by chance, Caroline. He came because of a debt that his cousin Thiago has been using to manipulate him. You see, Rowan's past isn't as clean as he would like us to believe. He made some poor decisions, got involved with the wrong people, and now he's been paying the price." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. "A debt? What kind of debt?" Mrs. Hargrove looked down at her hands, her voice heavy with sympathy. "Gambling debts mostly. Rowan lost a great deal of money to the wrong people, and Thiago, he's been using that to keep Rowan under his thumb. Rowan's been trying to work it off, to make things right, but Thiago has been taking advantage of him, pushing him further into a life he wants to escape from." A mix of anger and pity surged through me as I listened to her words. I had known there was more to Rowan's story, that he had been hiding something from me, but I hadn't imagined it was this. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and frustration. "Why didn't he trust me?" Mrs. Hargrove reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "He didn't want to burden you, Caroline. He was ashamed, afraid that you would see him differently if you knew the truth, and I think, deep down, he didn't want to risk losing you. But Thiago's been holding that debt over him, and Rowan's been trapped, doing things he never wanted to do." The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, and I felt a pang of regret for the way I had judged Rowan. But the hurt was still there, the betrayal still raw, and I couldn't shake the image of him with that woman, the way he had lied to me, the way he had let me believe in a future that was never meant to be. "Even if that's true," I said quietly, "he still lied to me. He still chose to be with them instead of keeping his promises." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes softened with understanding. "I know, dear, and I'm not here to make excuses for him. Rowan has made his mistakes, and he has to live with the consequences. But I wanted you to know the truth, to understand that not everything is as it seems. I looked down at our joined hands, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. What am I supposed to do with this information, Mrs. Hargrove? It doesn't change what happened. She sighed, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. That's something only you can decide, Caroline. But sometimes knowing the truth can help us find a way forward, even if it's painful. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between us. I knew Mrs. Hargrove meant well, that she was trying to help me make sense of everything, but I still felt lost, adrift in a sea of emotions that I couldn't quite navigate. Finally, Mrs. Hargrove stood, giving me a sad but hopeful smile. Take your time, Caroline. Don't rush into any decisions. Just think about what you've learned and what it means for you. I nodded, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside me. As she turned to leave, I found myself speaking before I even realized what I was saying. Mrs. Hargrove, do you think Rowan ever truly cared about me? Or was it all just a lie? She paused at the door, looking back at me with a tenderness that nearly brought tears to my eyes. I believe he did care about you, Caroline. Maybe more than he even realized. But love can be complicated. It doesn't always follow the path we want it to, and sometimes people make mistakes out of fear or shame. With that, she left, the door closing softly behind her. I sat there for a long time, her words echoing in my mind, trying to make sense of the tangled mess of emotions that had taken hold of my heart. Later that night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep as Mrs. Hargrove's revelations churned in my mind. I kept replaying everything I had learned, the truth about Rowan's debt, the way Thiago had manipulated him, and the lies he had told me. It was all too much to process, too much to bear. Unable to take it any longer, I got out of bed and paced the floor of my small cottage, trying to calm the storm inside me. But every time I thought I had found some semblance of peace, the image of Rowan's face, the look of guilt and shame in his eyes, would come rushing back, and the pain would start all over again. Just as I was about to give in to the tears that threatened to spill over, there was a sudden knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. No one ever visited at this hour. Who could it be? With trembling hands, I opened the door, and there, standing on the porch, was Rowan. His clothes were disheveled, his hair a mess, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. He looked like a man on the edge, lost and desperate. Caroline, he said, his voice rough and hoarse, I need to talk to you. Please, let me explain. I stared at him, the mix of emotions swirling inside me. Anger, hurt, pity, and something else I wasn't ready to name. Rowan, what are you doing here? It's late. I know, he said quickly, stepping closer, his eyes pleading with me. But I couldn't stay away. I couldn't let you go on thinking that I didn't care. Caroline, I do care. More than anything. I folded my arms across my chest, trying to keep the barrier between us, but his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Then why did you lie to me, Rowan? Why didn't you tell me the truth? He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his messy hair. Because I was scared. Scared of losing you, scared of what you'd think of me if you knew the truth. I didn't want you to see me as some failure who got in over his head. Rowan, I said, my voice trembling with emotion, you could have told me. I would have understood. But instead, you pushed me away. You let me believe in a future that wasn't real. Tears welled up in his eyes as he looked at me, his expression full of regret. I know. I messed up, Caroline. I let Thiago drag me down. I let the debt control my life, and I hurt you in the process. I hate myself for it. But I swear, everything I said about us, about wanting a future with you, that was real. It still is. I felt my resolve waver, my heart aching at the sight of him so broken, so desperate for forgiveness. But the wounds were still fresh, the pain still too raw. Rowan, I whispered, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. You've lied to me, kept things from me. How do I know you won't hurt me again? He reached out, his hand trembling as he touched my arm, his eyes searching mine. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I know I have to earn back your trust, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But please, don't shut me out. Let me try to make things right. I looked at him, my heart torn in two. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give him another chance, but the other part of me was terrified. terrified of getting hurt again, of being betrayed by the man I had once loved so deeply. "I need time," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think, to figure out what I want, what I can handle." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Take all the time you need, Caroline. I'll wait. I'll be here whenever you're ready." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving me alone once more with my thoughts and the heavy burden of the secrets that had been revealed. As I closed the door, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But there was also a lingering fear, a fear of the unknown, of what the future would hold now that everything had changed. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be more pain, more challenges to face. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I also felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal, to move forward, and to rebuild the life I had lost.